Hello everyone. Before we get started, grab your nearest teddy bear, grab yourself a beverage, and we will get settled. We will start with the analyzation of the main character and then later his ghost. And yeah. So through reading the story, you notice that we don't know his name. We get to know his past, what he has done throughout the storm, and what he is doing, but we don't know his name. We don't know him personally, like other characters in stories. And the biggest reason I think that the author chose to not include his name is because of the theme. The theme being everything is temporary and we have to learn to adapt to the changes. Through this story, the main character, he realizes that everything is temporary and he is adapting to the changes that are going on in his world, such as moving from barn to barn, or from place to place, having other connections with other characters, such as Helene. Helene being a pregnant woman that he found in a cathedral. Like when he says, or when a quote says, he didn't usually sleep in his room, but Helene was now in his. He is adapting to Helene entering his life, and he accepts that. But another thing about changes is going through the 5 stages of grief. We notice throughout the story that the main character goes through the 5 stages of grief. It doesn't show it directly, but he does. And we don't know a lot about the first 2 stages, which is denial and anger, because we weren't with him at the beginning of the storm or when the world started to change. But we have little hints about those throughout the story, such as he gets angry at himself when he says, "Get up," he thought, and then because it was proving difficult, he thought buffalo. He had anger towards himself, and that was him coping through the pain of being in this world at this moment. That was his way of coping with the pain. He also does, it also says that he did a stock check. He did this every day unnecessarily, but it made him feel calmer. That's another way to cope. Instead of getting angry with himself or denying that he doesn't have enough resources or that he isn't doing a well enough job, he is coping with those feelings through doing the check, through saying the word buffalo to himself and making himself feel stronger, since he doesn't have that many people to motivate him. He doesn't have people to motivate him through this hard time. He is also telling himself reckless idiot, he thought. Don't fuck it up. He did want to live. Moments like this reminded him. Moments like this made him feel more real than he ever had before. He became more skillful because of them. He evolved. He is changing and adapting through everything he does just to cope with being in this world. So the third stage of grief, it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So the third one being bargaining, he starts to bargain with himself. For example, when saying sometimes he was amazed that there were enough objects left to loosen and scatter about. Sometimes he wondered whether these were just the same millions of shoes and bottles and curtains in flight. He is bargaining with himself and saying, well, maybe this is the worst it's gonna get. It's not gonna get any worse. Maybe it isn't that bad living here at this time, since it's been years and it's already starting to calm. And yeah, we also see him bargaining with himself through his morals. He has his rules or morals throughout the story. For example, when he says he always called out to make sure they were empty first. It wasn't really etiquette. It wasn't really robbing. It was retrieval of what he had abandoned, or what had been abandoned. He still has his morals through being in this ever-changing world. He makes these rules for himself, like not entering a place without making sure, or without making sure that someone isn't there. He also has morals towards other people, such as Helene. He, like, when it says he probably needed some fruit, but he'd rather give the fruit to Helene. Even though he is in this place, he knows, or he feels less important than Helene being pregnant and having another life to take care of. It also says that he'd had a tin of smoked pheasant pate for 2 years, too much of a boon to eat by himself. He doesn't feel like he earned it. He is still bargaining with himself, and it's hard for him to accept the fact that he has survived for this long and he deserves to have the things that he has and not go out looking for more, or being active in this world. He is still searching for that. Yeah. The fourth stage of grief is depression, and we could see little glimpses of his sadness or depression throughout the story. For example, when he tells us about his past, and how he keeps little things close to him. When he says his mother had always joked his birthdays were easy. As a kid, he didn't need items or money. His mother had always joked his birthdays were... Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. His mother had always joked his birthdays were easy. As a kid, he didn't need many toys, field comforts, or gadgets. His mother had died in a flu pandemic, so had his little brother. Through that little two sentences, we could see that he doesn't need much to survive, and he is accepting that fact. But he also remembers his family in the past. And I believe that every time he does feel like he needs more, he remembers his family and his mother on his birthdays. And it's sad to think how he thinks, not needing as much as other people, and remembering his dead relatives. So that is a big part of his depression. He also flashbacks to having another roommate, Craig, and he does do some things to better himself. For example, here it says, Craig was much older than him, but wasn't clever or good at planning. Things had turned bad. He got out as soon as he could and wasn't sorry. He knows what's best for him in this world. He wasn't sorry for leaving Craig, but he is trying to cope through that depression and that sadness of not having people that he knows around him. It also says that he imagined climbing on to the bed next to her and putting his arm over her shoulder. He is longing for relationships as deep as family members, and he is going through a hard time having Helene there and not anyone else. And he was also worried about her and her baby. Like when he says he knew she worried about the baby coming, that frightened him too. And also he says he thought probably she hadn't developed any methods to help, like picturing the buffalo, and he worried about her. He's always thinking about others before himself, and we could see nowadays that is something that people who are depressed do. They put others before themselves, and it's a way of coping with all the change of the world. He is always using coping mechanisms, like the buffalo and the stock check, but he has expectations for himself, like not like going back into a house that he had already gone and finding good things. He has an expectation for himself to go back out there, get the things that he needs, to take care of Helene and her baby. Like in the story, it says that he was collecting baby formula for the baby when the baby comes, and he was collecting pages of books and poems for Helene since she was an English teacher and she enjoyed that type of thing. He had these expectations for himself, and he knew how to organize it so that it wouldn't be too much for him, but he knew he had time. Towards the end of the story, we could see that he was turning towards acceptance of being in a world that has the howl and is changing. And we could see him accept the fact that he has to change and he is adapting. He has hope. He begins to long for the future. Like this little piece that says 2 years ago he had seen a stag. That little bit, that little moment that happened 2 years ago gave him hope for the future. And he is helping, that is helping him cope through this world. It also says that the good things had to be held in mind and remembered and celebrated. That was why he had to get the pages for Helene and why they would have a nice Christmas. He's thinking about the future. He's thinking about Helene. He's thinking about Christmas. That is his way of coping, and he is longing for the future because he knows that if he just goes down in this pit of depression and of the past, he will never get out of it, and it won't help his survival in this world that is always adapting and always changing. It also says that he had been dreaming of finding a couple works that would be something special, bound in plastic, perhaps unviolated. He wanted to find something for Helene, something that would give her hope, and he's kind of trying to use the same process that he had to help Helene. Also, it says she could read it while she nursed the baby. She could think about the good things that remained. All he needed were the last 2 acts. He is thinking about the future. He's not saying if this happens, he's saying it will happen. This is him accepting the fact that this is the way things are now, and yeah. And at the end of the story, he said, it says he smiled. He would come back after Christmas and search properly. This is another example of him thinking about the future and using those little good moments and help and having more motivation towards the future. In the last paragraph, it said there's a couple of sentences that prove his acceptance. It says, on the way out, he saw his reflection in the dusty, cracked hall mirror. Suppose he was a kind of demon made in this place. But he felt human. He remembered feeling human. His knee hurt. He could use a can opener. And he liked Christmas. He turned away from the mirror and climbed back out the window. Snow was driving past on the wind. He is finally at the point where he knows who he is in this world, and he accepts the fact that it's not going to change. And it's sad, but it's kind of you have this feeling of you can do it, you will get through this, and you will survive even if it gets worse. At the beginning of the story, we were like, wow, how can anyone survive through this? This is so hard. Is he gonna make it? But he showed us how to have hope and how to make everything that is temporary feel permanent, and not only not saying no to change, and learning to adapt to those changes. And it can really help us through a lot. I think everyone should take his story and adapt it into their own life. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed. Have a nice night.